Hello, everyone. Welcome again to the Expert Talks show. We are so thankful for the Falcon City of Wonders for their initiative and support toward the Expert Talks. Your Excellency, Mr. Harth Al Musa, the Vice Chairman of Falcon City and Wonders, thank you very much for all your efforts and welcome with us.
Thank you very much, Jassim. It's our pleasure and duty to host these talks. And we are very thankful for having the high caliber attendees today, Mr. Jeevan and Mr. Stefan, to join us with their expertise in providing awareness to the community. And your kind self, Jassim, for being the commentator. You're doing a fantastic job.
Thank you very much. The law is the law. Without it and without the right advice on how we should act, we never can reach. Therefore, kindly welcome with me Mr. Steve Kelly, the partner of the Law Advisory Firm. Mr. Stephen, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Without education and knowledge, no one can know the right things. Therefore, I would like to welcome Mr. Jeevan, the Senior Lecturers of Dubai Real Estate Institute and the CEO of the Zizis Group. You're on the mute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jassim, Mr. Al-Harith, and Stephen. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be with you today. And I'm very excited to participate in this great series. I know you've done some amazing work in the past. I've been looking through all your videos. I've been a part of it as one of your audience members before, so I'm really excited. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you very much. Today, our expert talks, we will talk about why paying community and service charges. Everyone would like to know about it and who would like to pay the service and why to pay. Is the landlord, is the tenants? We don't know, and we'd like to know from you guys, especially there's a law firm, there's an educations, and there's a developer. So between a developer and the law and to someone who will educate us about the service charge. But before that, let me start asking Mr. Harth, can you give us a quick summary about Dubai property service charge? Mr. Al-Harith?
I do not know how much I can summarize in this short time as people give lectures on it, huh, Mr. Jeevan? But Jassim, to make the long story short, and the easiest way that I like to explain it to people is, let's imagine the four of us own apartments in one building. And this building, for example, let's say it's in Falcon City, and this way I can elaborate more on the building responsibility towards Falcon City and then our responsibility towards the building. All of us in the building are going to have our usage of electricity. So obviously we will pay these services ourselves because we're not sharing them. You pay your bill, I pay my bill, and so on. Jeevan and Stephen will pay their own bills for their own usages. However, there are the common areas in the building that have to be taken care of. It has to be cleaned, it has to be well maintained, it has to be reconditioned every now and then, so we create a reserve fund for it. And then that in reality is the system and the mechanism of how to start regularizing the service charges mechanism, and then the aspect of the total charge that comes on the building. So we add up our landscaping, our security, our maintenance for the elevator, so on and so forth. And then we see who has the biggest apartment there, and we make him pay the more the highest fee. So it is based on service charges. And usually you will see service charges differ from commercial, residential or even mixed use development and the usages. And sometimes it is very straightforward and simple, just like this apartment, imaginary building apartment that the four of us live in it. And then it becomes complicated and a mega complex that has all the type of retails and residential and hotel and commercial. So it becomes very extremely complex. This building that we are living in will have its responsibility for the greater development, and that will be the master development area, because we, the residents of the building, now we will start utilizing the services of that larger community. We'll be using the road, we'll be using the main gate security, we'll be using, I do not know, the different type of services that they will offer. So in a nutshell, this is how I can summarize what is service charges.
That will lead us, Mr. Al-Harith, to the question, and I believe there is a law behind this. I mean, no one can come up with the service charge without being applied a law. And I would like to ask Mr. Stephen, as far I came to know, there is something called GOP, which is jointly owned property law. So I would like to know from you, how does this new jointly owned property law impacting on the management, as well, what are the key changes and how do they affect the owners?
Thank you, Joseph. And you're right in saying that behind the service charge regime sits laws that put in place the rules and regulations as to how service charges are raised. Now, everywhere in the world, there are apartment buildings, and everywhere we go, there are different laws to govern how these buildings are regulated. Now, Dubai has been at the forefront in this part of the world with respect to its laws governing multiply owned development. They passed a law in 2008 that supplemented the then civil code that governed these multiply owned buildings. The government has recently, last year, enacted another law that had the effect of replacing the previous law and taking advantage of things that they'd learned over that sort of 10 or 12 year period. I always start with what, in terms of talking about a law, is what has not changed under the new law. And there are things that all relate to service charges and service charge calculations. The first thing is that the law deals with how common areas in the building, which is, as we just discussed, the areas that are shared between the owners, how those areas are identified, how they're shown on plans, how they're measured. And it was very important, the government wanted to make sure that all buildings were measured the same way, because developers were using different methodologies as to how to measure their buildings and their units. And so it was quite confusing for consumers when faced with different measurement methodologies. So the government has imposed a measurement methodology, and that has remained in the current law. So the survey regulations that have been in place since 2008 have not changed. Also, what has not changed is that there is a service charge calculation regime that RERA has been using to regulate the industry for some time. I'm going to leave that a little bit for Jivan to talk more about because that's an area that he specialises in terms of how complex developments, service charges are calculated for complex developments, as we mentioned before, because it can become incredibly complex as to what is a fair and equitable distribution of service charges. Other things have remained in the law as well, as you'd expect the government to do. Developers remain liable for buildings for 10 years for structural defects and for 1 year for non-structural defects. So that was an important part of the law that has remained in the law. What has changed, however, under the new law is that previously Dubai had owners associations, and those owners associations every owner was a member of the association. Now, what the government has done is they've seen that really these buildings are run better by professional building managers. And what the government has seen is they've looked to empower the building managers far more, and also make the building managers far more accountable and responsible for making sure the buildings in Dubai are run properly. And that's seen as a very positive step for the industry, because unfortunately not all owners were sharing the same view as to how buildings should be maintained, what level of service charges should be raised. And we saw some buildings really not being maintained to a standard appropriate for Dubai. So the government has decided that it's better to regulate the industry and let professional building managers take responsibility for those buildings. That has, however, caused some work to be done with respect to the existing developments that were being regulated under the previous law. So now we have some new documentation that needs to be prepared for the building that really replaces the owners association with the building manager. Now, under the new law, the owners still have a very active say in how their buildings are run. The government has put in place a regulation of having an owners committee in every building, and that owners committee must be resident in the building, and they are tasked with making sure the building manager listens to its owners and runs the building properly. And that committee will also liaise with RERA, and RERA will also make sure the building manager is doing a great job. In short, RERA, I think, is taking a greater role in the management of buildings now, and we see that as an industry as a very good thing. You know, RERA has done an amazing job in Dubai over since its formation, and is going from strength to strength. And we see that RERA taking a greater role in this part of the industry is very, very positive. RERA has already had a very significant role in approving service charge budgets and making sure that developers are doing a good job and not looking to pass on costs to owners that they shouldn't. And just one last point I'd like to mention about the new law is that there's now very clearly a situation that if an owner does not pay their service charges, there are far clearer rights in relation to what can be done. And it does extend to if an owner does not pay their service charges for an extended period of time with RERA's approval, then you can seek a power of sale over that apartment so that you can recover those service charges, because it's simply not fair that some owners do not pay whilst the other owners pay. So that's the main changes to the law. We think it's a very, very positive step for Dubai, and from everything we're hearing, it's working well.
It's very good to know that the law in Dubai, it's been developed, and RERA, since they announced this law, that they are now improving a lot, and they're going toward improving the laws to sit and help the developer as well the owners. And I will jump to Mr. Jivan, asking you a question, since you are one of person that worked and set up one of the biggest community management company for AMR, and with that type of experience and that type of big communities, can you give us some tips of the successful community management, how that was been running?
Right. Thank you very much. You know, I feel sometimes the community management industry is a little bit misunderstood by people. People mix it up for facilities management and property management or asset management, and they think community management is the same thing, but it is actually quite different. All these are very individual professions in themselves. They all come under the umbrella of real estate management, but they're very different. For example, when you're talking about facilities management, we're talking about the people who actually do the work in the building. They fix the thing, they mow the lawns, they clean the windows. Those are the facilities manager. And the property manager is the person who looks after the individual's property. For example, if I have an apartment in Mr. Al-Harith's building and I would like to I'm not living there, but I want to rent it out. I needed somebody to look after that, my particular unit, I would call a property manager. But a community manager is someone who looks after the common area, the common property. He doesn't look after my particular unit. He doesn't even look after somebody else's particular unit. What he does, he looks at the common areas. We're talking about the lift lobbies, the staircases, the landscaping and the garden, and so on and so forth. So the community manager has various responsibilities. And the way that I've put it as is the 6 major areas of responsibility. That includes the operation, the day-to-day running of the building, includes the technical maintenance of the building. It's to do with the financials of the building. That means collecting service, determining the service charges, collecting the service charges, paying the service providers. It also talks about the compliance regime, that is making sure you have the insurance and the permits and all the fire extinguishers and so on. And it talks about one very important thing which a lot of us miss out is the social aspects. When I'm talking about social aspects, I'm talking about having a community event, having recreation areas, meeting customers, looking after their needs. That's a very essential part of a community manager's job, which somehow we forget. We think it's all about maintenance. And the last 6th one is the corporate responsibility. I mean, looking after the community is also corporate responsibility, and looking after your company's interest as a developer or a manager. So these are the 6 areas: operations, technical, financial, social, compliance, and corporate. All these 6 areas are needed for us to perform as community managers. And I just want to go to the first question. We are talking about service charges, and I'm very grateful to Al-Harith, who's very, very nicely explained to us. And I'm very grateful that a developer has such a good and in-depth idea of what a service charge is. And of course, we have Stephen, who've talked about the law and how the law governs this. But it's very important for us to understand when we say paying service charges, right? Service charge is actually not a payment. A service charge is a contribution, right? We are contributing to the well-being of our own community. So we're not really paying this to someone, okay? We are contributing to the upkeep and maintenance of our common area, not my private unit. It's the common area that I'm contributing. And so when I'm contributing this money to this common area, including the building, the facade, the landscape, security, the gatehouse, all those things that I'm contributing to are actually building up the value of my property. And when the property value goes up, whose value goes up? My personal unit value also goes up. So when we're talking about service charges, I just wanted to say this out there to people who sometimes misunderstand why service charges are important. This is the reason why service charges are important.
Good, but at the end, who's computing this? Is the owner or the tenants? Because there's such kind dispute sometimes. The tenants, they said, we will not going to pay, and the owner, the landlord. I'm not talking as a developer. I'm talking as a landlord. Sometime also they said we will not going to pay. We will come to that at the end. Who need to pay? But Mr. Al-Harith, I believe the service charge could be a challenge for an investment in Dubai property market. Is it?
Well, Mr. Jassim, before we discuss if it's a challenge or not, I think it's very important to highlight over here that any investment that is done without the correct study beforehand is a dangerous investment.
Correct.
And when it comes to real estate, I'll go back to my simple example of the apartments. As Jeevan said, for example, let's say you want to rent the apartment out. So you bought the apartment for a certain amount of money. And then when you rent it out, that is classified as your income. And then you have got your expenses. Your expenses are going to be your DIWA bill, your air condition usage for district cooling. And then obviously your service charge also will be a part of your direct expenses for your apartment. And then the gross profit is what you will end up with. After you have reached to that point, then you calculate your gross profit versus your initial investment, and you take the full calculation of the return of investment, and you see if it's a good investment or a bad investment. So it is not service charges that have actually made the investment bad, but it is not doing your homework and then getting surprised by a high service charge. All over the world, there are places that have different type of service charges within a certain type of city, because it depends on the actual building that you will invest in, or the community or the area you will invest in. This certain community has a certain standard. This community has a different standard. So you have to do your homework before you come and you invest, and then start telling Rira, they are charging me so much. Haven't you done your homework? I'm not only talking from a developer point of view, but I'm talking from a businessman point of view. You have to do your homework. You have to go out and see by yourself where is the location of this investment that you're going to do. That will give you at least a feeling of the type of investment that you're putting your money in. You can ask questions to the seller. It is a moral obligation by the seller to disclose to you the type of facility it's going to be, the vision. So if the seller tells you we're going to have 6 security point checkpoints before you reach the elevators, you have to think, okay, each security point is going to have a security person. And then they tell you there is going to be lakes and waterfalls and lush rose garden. You're going to pay for all that services. So you have to take it into consideration. So I would not say that the actual service charges is the challenge for investments in Dubai, but the lack of research done by the investor. And it has always been, not only in Dubai, all over the world, buyer be aware. So this is how I'd like to answer this question, Mr. Jassim.
Thank you, Mr. Al-Harith. Stephen, in that case, we would like to know who's the one who's going to approve the service charge in Dubai, and how that being calculated. Is the RERA, is the owner, community owners, who's the approving the service charge?
Yes, well, I mean, RERA has regulated the service charge industry for many, many years now, and that hasn't changed under the new law. So, in fact, if anything, it has become a little bit even more regulated. We have they've introduced a system called MOLAC, where service charges are now paid into directly by owners effectively into the government, into a government escrow system to protect the funds of purchasers. But in terms of answering the question about who approves service charges, it's very, very much still sits in the hands of RERA. And RERA has an awful lot of experience. They've learned a lot of, gained a lot of that experience from the likes of Jivan when he was at EMA, Jivan having to explain to RERA how these complex buildings, operate and what would be a fair allocation of costs. But RERA has taken a lot of advice and from experts, and really are very well now equipped to approve service charges across the board. The process really still sits with the building manager to prepare the budget. They will prepare a budget which they believe will raise a significant amount of money to run the building to an appropriately high level. They will then submit that budget to RERA, and RERA will assess it as to whether or not they consider it is in alignment with industry levels and standards. RERA understands that some buildings are more expensive to run than other buildings, because some buildings may be branded, they may be associated with a hotel or with a luxury brand, and those buildings are likely to have a higher level of security and other services. So RERA appreciates that not all buildings are the same, but RERA also, has a vision. They don't want service charges to play a factor in the industry, and they don't want them to be too high. So they are keeping a very close eye on what the service charges are and making sure that owners get value for money. That's, RERA is a consumer protection agency, and they're looking at what are the people paying and what value do they get for that money. I may pass that question to Jivan as well, if that's okay, because he's very much in this world.
Yeah, no, I think, Stephen, you're absolutely right in everything you're saying. First of all, the building manager, the community manager, as we call it, because it could be a building and it could be a community. It's pretty much the same. We have a standard way of calculating this. This is not rocket science. This is based on international best practices. We have certain line items which are standard across all our communities. In fact, like there's a format, there are different components. There's something called a general fund. There is a reserve fund, which Al-Harith talked about as well. The general fund is for the day-to-day affairs of the management of the community. The reserve fund is for replacement of items of a capital nature, like, for example, waterproofing or swimming pool tiles or lift cab cars and so on and so forth. And then all these are calculated based on what are the different services that you need to run this particular building or this particular community. Some communities may be more complex, so you have many more services, and in some communities are less complex, so you have less services. Now, these, as Stephen puts it, are actually checked by an auditor even before it goes to RERA. So RERA has appointed some certain auditors, approved auditors. The auditors actually check whether the community manager, the building manager, is in fact putting in the right prices based again on industry practices, based on benchmark. So by the time RERA gets it, they get a pretty well done calculation. And even after that, they will question the community manager and say, why is this so high? Or why is this so low? What is the reason for this? And there's a justification. So I can tell you in in certain terms, when the owner gets the community charge, it is being checked and vetted by many parties, including RERA. So people in Dubai can be very sure that they are getting a service charge which is accurate, which is something that needs to be paid.
So Jivan, as far as I understand from you, no one can play with the service charge cost, because as you said, there's a RERA, there is an auditor, there is the owner communities. So everyone, they should come up with a real figure and numbers based of facts, invoices, practice, calculation. So no one can come up and say, I would like to charge you, let's say 20 dirham per square feet. Or it's not like this. Now, no. In that case, I will, let me ask a question here. How can the service charge be given more value and meet the quality service?
So again, you see, first of all, the owners have to understand, and you ask a question, who pays, the tenant or owner? It has to be the owner. The owner is the one who pays the service charges, because again—
Why? But I would like to stop you here. Why the owner is paying, but who's staying in the apartment is the tenants? He's enjoying
It doesn't matter who's saying. As part, you see, a characteristic of a jointly owned property, the reason why it's called jointly owned, because it's owned by many people, not just one person. As a part of the, when you actually buy into a freehold community, three things happen. One is you are a member of that community. Previously, we used to call it owners association. Now we call it a jointly owned property. The second is that we have documents that bind us together, like the community rules, the declaration. Previously, we used to call it the constitution. A lot of these documents, so it's applicable to me, it's applicable to you. And the third is service charges. These three things that every owner of every freehold community must commit to when they buy a property. So it is always the owner, because the owner owns the property and he owns a portion of the common area. It is never the tenant who pays for the service charges. Okay. Now, if you are renting a property, that's different, because people are used to renting property. You're just paying the rent. You're not paying anything extra. You're just paying the rent. But if you're owning a property, you are actually paying the service charges. Now, owners might think the tenant should pay, but that's wrong. The tenant never pays the service charges. It's always the owners.
Well, from my point of view, I believe the tenants have to pay, but maybe the developer has different opinion here. And
you're a landlord, Jassim?
Well, in some places, yes.
Yeah, that's.
No, I just want to say this is an international law. This has nothing to do with Dubai in particular.
Anywhere in
the world. service charges contributions are always by the owners. Now, if the owners have a private relationship with the tenant and tells the tenant to pay on their behalf, that's between them. But as far as the community manager is concerned, as far as the developer is concerned, the community service charge paying by the owner. Now, I just want to put one more thing. If the developer still has the property and they have not sold it, the developer is liable to pay the same service charges. So it's not just if he does not sell the unit that somebody else has to pay. The developer, if this unit is unsold, the developer is liable for the same service charges.
And to add on what Jeevan said, I think also location plays a high what's the word that I'm looking for?
Premium?
It plays a high premium on the rent that you as a landlord will be charging the tenant.
Right.
If we take hypothetically exactly same building in different locations, the location is going to play a very high role, and you as the landlord will benefit on that, regardless of the service charges if they are equally the same. Right. So it is always the landlord's duty to contribute on the service charge.
Mr. Al-Harith, you are, please.
So I was just saying, from a legal perspective, tenants come and go, owners are always there, and it's the owner's asset, and the owner is responsible to making sure they make the contribution towards the building. If the apartment sits empty for the year, the owner still has to pay their service charges for that year. It's not linked to whether or not the apartment is used or not used, rented out or not rented out. And it is the only way that the government can actually ensure that the building is being maintained, by imposing that obligation on the owners. As Jeevan said, contractually, owners can agree with tenants that tenants will pay. Of course, the tenant will pay less rent in that situation, but legally, the owner is always responsible for service charges.
I believe, Mr. Steve, now you answered me quickly. You answered me exactly what Mr. Al-Harith is trying to to put me in the corner if I'm a landlord. But let me ask you, Mr. Al-Harith, as a developer, can you give us some tips to how to maintain and operate a high performance building community?
Well, as a developer, like we previously mentioned in the beginning of the show, it is not the developer's job to maintain a building. The developer's job is to build, sell, and hand over to the owner's association or the owner's representative, whatever the type of the building it's going to be. If it's going to be a residential, a commercial, a hotel apartment. So the body that's going to maintain is responsible of how to the maintenance do it. But I'll give you another point of what's the developer's role. Before the law came out, the developers did not have a huge, I would say, responsibility when it comes to the design of a specific building. But right now, it is very important for a developer to make it easy for the association manager to take handover and be able to calculate the service charges based on the common areas and based on the usages. There, as we said earlier, there are some buildings that are just a headache to come up with the actual calculation, because it's like this. You cannot separate it, and it's not straightforward. So I think the developer has to make sure that in its mandate for its design, regardless if it's a community or a building, make it simple for the owners association to take over. And then the same would be to the community and how the joint property mixes with the master community service charges, and a fair calculation is done based on law and audited twice before submitted even to RERA, so that it becomes smooth and the service charges at the end of the day be fair for all?
Well, there's a lot of questions, our audience, we will get back to you to all these questions at the end of this webinar. Mr. Stephen, if you think the current law of the GOP, the jointly owner, need to be amended or need to be changed, so do you have any kind of recommendations, or you think so that the law can be improved by different ideas from you, from the law point of view and from the real practice?
I mean, law as a rule, all laws need to continue to evolve and grow as time changes and lessons are learned. The new law that's recently been released in 2019 really was a reflection on what was learnt over the previous 10, 12 years. Will there be improvements going forward? Yes, I'm sure there will be, because that's the nature of law. We learn from our mistakes and we then regulate to stop those. I think that the key issues that were faced under the previous law have now been addressed, and I don't see any real gaps in the current law. Although, like everything, a law is written on paper, and it has to be interpreted and it has to be implemented. And the one thing that Dubai does is Dubai develops the most complex developments in the world. And so there's always going to be a challenge in regulating these types of developments. We have developments in Dubai that are more complicated than developments in almost anywhere in the world. We have island reclamation. We have the tallest tower in the world that Jivan had to structure and work out how it should work. We have massive communities. We have a very, very complex, sophisticated industry here, and so the law will always have to continue to grow and adapt to be able to address those. Now, the good thing about our experience with RERA and the Land Department is that they listen, they appreciate that it is a very difficult industry, and they are always willing to accommodate and make sure that, provided owners are being protected, then they will assist the developers in putting together these most incredibly complicated developments. So we're happy as lawyers at the moment, but are we saying that it's easy to do this, to structure and document these complex communities? That the likes of Falcon City and are developing? No, it's not easy. But then again, nor should it be easy. The development industry is a very, very complex, sophisticated industry, and so should the service charge regime, and so should the laws that regulate, literally, millions of people. So we're happy, but we're always looking to see what improvements can be done, and we share that knowledge mostly through the likes of Jivan with his training sessions as well. With the community and with the regulators to try so that we all keep moving forward, because everybody in this region is chasing Dubai. So we have to make sure that Dubai continues to be, that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps ahead.
Absolutely. Dubai is always in the top of the list. And as you said, the good things that RERA and the government, they are always listening to the people in the field, and they are always trying to do as much they can do in terms of changing the law to adapt the current situation, which is that very good point that you brought it up. Jivan, I'm trying to highlight one point relating to the safety and security in terms of how can we always maintain the safety and security of our community and buildings.
Yeah, this is I always say awareness and education is very important. Of course, I'm an educator, so I'm a bit biased about that. But one of the principal duties we have as community managers is to create awareness and education. And again, we have some recent incidents that happened here in Dubai, which is safety and security related. And people are saying, the security should be tougher and we should not allow people to come in. And I tell homeowners and residents, a lot of the security and safety responsibility is actually our own responsibility. Just like we talked about the COVID situation, the UAE said we are all responsible. If we allow unknown people to come to our house, if we leave our doors open, if we allow illegal maids to come and do our work, we cannot blame the security. We cannot blame the security guards for not keeping us safe. We need to keep ourselves safe. So regardless of where we live, no matter if we live in the most prestigious tower in the world or the most expensive community, I believe safety and security responsibility is always ours. The way we allow our children to go to the swimming pool alone, I mean, that's a security, that's a safety risk. So we need to create awareness, and I'm very happy in Falcon City, Al-Harith and the team, they've done a lot of work on creating awareness and beautiful posters and telling people all the important things they need to do as residents in the community. So everyone has a responsibility and we should never forget that.
Very good. And there's a lot of questions. If you allow me to go through the questions before we ending up, we have around another 15 minutes or 10 minutes. There's a different questions here. I think some of them we answered through the live sessions, but there is a question about, let me go through it.
I just saw it. I just wanted to make one point as well.
Please do.
How Dubai is, being looked at. I mean, we are looking at international cities and international jurisdictions, but there are other countries that are looking at us. I know in Bahrain, they have got an amazing law as well. And some very, very smart people there are helping that industry go forward. And I've been there a few times. I'm very impressed with the work being done by Bahrain RERA as well. And pretty innovative. They're looking at the way we are doing it. They are adapting. They're making things better, making things easier. So it's not only we are leading the way, it's other countries. And so we are learning from each other. We also have an industry here. We call it the Community Association Institute chapter here in Dubai. And through the chapter, we've got all like-minded professionals like all of us. We meet together. We come with ideas. We approach our RERA here, they listen to us. So there's a lot of activity happening that maybe many people are not aware of, but we have a robust industry.
Sure. I mean, today through this webinar, at least the attendees and the public, they came to know about some value informations. There's a question here. What if we feel that RERA is approving the high maintenance and service charge and we did not pay it? So what is the outcome of it? There's a question, if RERA just approved the high maintenance cost, and but I think I believe that we
I want
answered.
to disagree with that, because I can tell you that RERA is checking every single penny.
Yeah, true.
They are cutting the cost quite a lot. So when people are getting their invoices, believe you me, those invoices are pretty fair. But where the problem, I believe, is as community managers are not doing a good enough job of telling the customers what they're paying for. So I think it's very important for us to tell our customers, send them nice information packs or put it on a notice board saying, here are the reason why your service charge is this amount. These are the services that we're providing for you. This is what we did last year. This is what we are going to do this year. I believe that if we tell our owners what they are paying for and we're open and transparent about it, I think a lot of these questions will go away.
True. There's a question also. The new law did not specify anything about seeking
there was Jassim, the other part of the question. the second part, what happens if you don't pay for it? I think that's very important.
Mhm. From a
Stephen,
developer point of Stephen.
Stephen, from a legal point of view, what happens if you don't pay your service charges?
Well, I suppose the starting point is Dubai actually has a relatively high percentage of people who do pay service charges. You know, but of course, and we do have a number of owners who do not pay their service charges, perhaps because their circumstances are such that they're unable to at a certain time. And then we have some owners who we call delinquent, who just don't like paying their bills. Okay. And that has been a problem in the industry, and there has been issues in being able to take appropriate action against those owners. Often we haven't been able to collect that money until the owner tries to sell their apartment, because they will never be able to sell their apartment if they don't pay. But it's not fair in the meantime that the other owners are footing the bill for that owner who's not paying. Now, the new law really has put a clear right of sale in the law to say that if an owner is delinquent and refuses to pay for an extended period of time, then you can seek an order from the Rent Disputes Settlement Centre for the sale of that apartment. Now that, of course, is a pretty dramatic step to take, but you know, we do know that you know, there will be situations where that does occur, and it will be a lesson to everybody. I know that the alternative is, of course, is just actions in the Dubai courts, which have also been very successful. It's very simple. An owner is responsible to pay. If they do not pay, then the court will put an order against them, and that order then you can attach to assets. So, you know, owners have to understand. I think there's a misconception that they're paying. Jivan said this at the start, that it is a payment. They feel that they're paying a third party for something. It's not a payment. It's a contribution towards shared costs. And that's the education that's missing in the industry, that owners don't understand that they're actually maintaining their own asset. They're paying a share of the common area costs of which they own, you know, and so they're not paying it to a third party. Just as a related point, there are no owners being overcharged in Dubai. There are some owners perhaps being undercharged in Dubai. Every single amount that is charged to owners goes into an escrow account and has to then be paid against an approved supply contract. And all of this is being audited. There are no developers making money out of service charges as there perhaps may have been, you know, 10 plus years ago. That part of the industry, you know, those days have gone. Owners are getting value for money. And as Jivan said, if they knew what they were paying for, then they'd probably understand better that their contribution is fair and reasonable.
So in that case, there was a questions also, Mr. Jivan. The new law did not specify anything about the sinking account. Is there anything to be added here?
I think sinking account, I believe they're talking about the reserve fund.
Could be, I think so.
Yes, yes. Okay, so the reserve fund in some places called sinking fund, some places called replacement reserve.
Yeah.
You know, the reserve fund is again a common knowledge. It's a best practice all around the world, because you have a fund not for today. It's not for today's maintenance, but at some time in the future, 5, 10, 20 years later, you need to replace things. It's very much like you replace the wheels of your car, or you replace something, a compressor in your home. It's the same thing. At some stage, that part there, it has a lifespan. And once the lifespan is over, you need to replace it. You're collecting money today for an expense in the future. And that is a fiduciary duty. That's the duty of the community manager. That's also the duty of the owners committee. And of course, it's the duty of every owner. So even the law may not explicitly, it actually mentions something, may not be explicitly in those particular words, but every community manager and RERA knows that a reserve fund or a sinking account is mandatory and it is needed. everywhere in the
Okay.
world.
And actually, the law does specifically require a reserve fund. So, as you said, the name they've used it, they've referred to it as a cash reserve.
Cash reserve, correct.
But it does relate to capital expenditure, and very separate from day-to-day general expenditure. So the law does account for it, and RERA will not approve a single budget that doesn't have a reserve fund component that is backed up by a reserve fund study to determine what money needs to be collected over the coming period. So that's not quite correct to say the law doesn't address it, because the law does very much address this.
It's a very important fund that I would call them speculator real estate owners who jump on the capital gain wave, and they would like to buy a real estate today and sell it after 5 years. They're not interested in the reserve fund because they're not going to be here when the reserve fund is going to be used. So they would love to see that reserve fund being used right now on decreasing the service charges. But every building, for example, if we take buildings as examples, have their lifespan, and sooner or later that chill water system and the chillers that you have and the blowers that you have in each apartment will soon need to be maintained and changed. I do not know, 15, 20, 25 years. Who's going to pay for all that? If you do not have a service, if you do not have a reserved fund or a sinking fund that's building up for that day when it comes in, then it's going to be heavy on all the owners, because they're not going to have AC. Either they pay, as they say, cash money up front, or it's gone. They'll not have their ACs and services. So it's very important to have these reserve funds studied, calculated. Everyone should chip in, and it should not be touched. It must be used only when the black day comes, as they say.
Exactly. And I just want to
And
add
I think,
sorry, Steve, I just want to add one more thing here, is that because I do a lot of work, I do work in the United States, in Spain, in South America, and in all these countries, I can tell you that people don't buy a property unless they see the reserve fund first. Because if you are buying a property and there is no reserve fund, it's a big red flag. I would suggest don't buy that property, because 10, 20 years later, you're going to be putting money from your own pocket to fix issues that, because it's finished its lifespan. So the reserve fund is an extremely important part of the budget.
There's a question here.
I'm sorry.
Please, yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying that we talk about RERA learning from industry experience. But perhaps one of the key areas that they have learned and was the need to heavily regulate reserve funds, because unfortunately, not all purchasers have a long-term vision. As we said, if you're only intending to own a property for 1 year, you don't care what happens in year 10. But and unfortunately, a number of buildings in Dubai did not have sufficient reserve funds, or certainly not at a level that would be sufficient if they were to continue to be only collecting those levels. RERA now has regulated this very heavily. They want to see a reserve fund analysis done. They want to make sure that buildings are going to be maintained to a standard appropriate for Dubai. We do not wish to have buildings falling into disrepair because owners do not have a proper long-term vision about their building. So I think that's one of the areas that the government has really taken total control of, and we're now seeing the benefits of buildings, returning back to levels that they should be at.
So since we are running a little bit late, I would like to bring up another questions. Should the service charge be paid toward the community facility that are under constructions? Mr. Al-Harith?
If a facility is under construction, then there is no, to the best of my knowledge as a developer, then there is no service charge because you're not maintaining it. So no, you should not pay for anything that's under construction. The service charges, I think, Jeevan, correct me if I'm wrong, you pay the first installment before handover, I think the buffer zone or something like that, and then that's when it continue. But under construction, no.
But it also depends, you're absolutely right, but it also depends. For example, if it's in a master community, for example, and there is a development, it's under construction, and for example, the person was supposed to finish the building, I'm just, for example, saying 1 year, and they take 2 years to finish it. But during that 1 extra year period, there's security guards, there are trucks coming. So then maybe that developer, that third party developer, that owner would have to pay a small portion to cover up the cost of the security guard, the road and things like that. You know, so those are the areas where maybe during construction, somebody have to pay. But as an owner, 100% agree with Al-Harith. If something, if let's say it's a gym is under construction or a swimming pool is under construction, absolutely not. You don't have to pay for the upkeep and maintenance of that.
So it means that you're paying for whatever you're enjoying the facility of it. So even if I move to the apartment and the swimming pool is still under constructions, that must be taken out of the cost of the service charge. Yeah, I'm right.
If it is under construction, but I just want to make a comment here, because I had a customer who kind of fought with me saying that I'm not going to pay for the swimming pool because I don't swim. Now that is not acceptable.
That's not acceptable.
So the person said, I don't swim, I don't use the swimming pool, so I'm not going to pay for the swimming pool. Another customer says, I'm on the ground floor and I'm not going to pay for the elevator because I don't have to use it. Right? So I just want to make this point. It doesn't matter whether you use the facility or not. If the facility is available for your use, you are duty bound to paying for it because it's part of the common property, and you as an owner, you have a duty and obligation to pay, to contribute to the upkeep and maintenance of your common property.
Okay.
I think Jassim, also to add to your question,
please.
I think the best way to answer that question is follow the dirham. Because when we pay service charges, we pay for a certain service, and you have all the right to go to the association manager and tell him, I'd like to see what I'm paying for. And by law, they are required to disclose to you where this money is going for, and then you can judge by your own self if this money is legitimate going to a service. As Mr. Jeevan said, maybe it would be a security guard that's maintaining, I do not know, a certain thing for this building that has something under construction, and then you will see if there is such a service or not. So you have to investigate again.
In that case, Mr. Al-Harith or Jeevan or even Stephen, is there a difference between commercials, properties and residentials? Because there was a question here, I think it was addressed to Mr. Jeevan, said, I agree with you that the owner is responsible to pay the service charge, as the rent value will include it and should cover the service charge. But in the commercial rented properties, as the landlord charge service charge on the top on the rent, and the RERA is allowing that?
I'm not sure. Sorry, maybe Stephen can answer.
Yeah, I mean, there is confusion in the market, especially in some commercial buildings that don't have multiple ownership, and also in retail malls that are owned by single mall operators. Often a mall operator will charge what they call a service charge to the tenant. Then the tenant will pay their rent, and then they'll pay a service charge, which is also a contribution to the maintenance of the common areas within the mall. The issue with that is that's not actually a service charge in terms of the jointly owned property law, because that's not a jointly owned property. That's just a mall owner charging tenants a charge towards the cost of operating the mall, because a lot of malls do not have separate metering. They do not. But unfortunately, the term service charge used in that context of retail and sometimes commercial is confusing, because it is very different to the service charge that we're discussing today.
That's the reason I don't like to call it a service charge. That's why I call it a contribution, right? And this is where the confusion is. Now I've understood, because Stephen, what you're talking about, because that service charge is not the service charge that we are talking about at all.
Yeah, a lot of countries call them levies, not service charges. They'll call it a building levy or a building contribution. the term
Yes.
service charge is confusing because of its use in the retail office industry.
True. It was so excited talks today, especially in the service charge and community facility charges. But I believe at the end, the service charge is a part of the investment, and
Yes.
to pay or not to pay. But at the end, you need to know for what you are paying, and the law at the end is allowing you to understand what you are paying, and it's being audited and justified by so many levels, so no one can give any numbers or figures without having a proper practice study and calculate it. At the end, I'm so glad to have all of you here, and I will look forward again to see you one more time. And as always, I say stay safe and say yes to life. This is Jassim Al-Bastaki for Expert Talks. Have a nice night.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jassim. Thank you, Jeevan. Thank you, Stephen. We had a great time, and thank you for your time again. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure.